It was supposed to be a calm winter morning on the Oregon coast. The tide lapped softly at Walport shore, the fog hanging low like a curtain over the Pacific. A man out for his usual walk spotted something in the water, something pale, still, and impossibly small. At first, he thought it was driftwood. Then the shape rolled with the current. It was a child. He ran closer, his breath catching the cold air, and realized the awful truth. A young boy, clothed only in his underwear, floating face down in the gray surf. His hair was neatly trimmed, his fingernails clean and even. Whoever he was, someone had cared for him once. Within minutes, deputies from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office were on scene. Detectives Dennis Bossy and Trish Miller stared at the body, the wind whipping against their coats. There were no visible injuries, no bruises, no lacerations, no signs of a struggle. The boy's face was peaceful, as if asleep. They guessed he was 3, maybe 4, a well-kept child who looked loved. The logical conclusion, a drowning, maybe a tragic accident. They waited for the call that should have come next. A frantic parent, a mother sobbing down the line that her son was missing. But hours passed, then a full day, and no one called. That silence was the first warning that something much darker was unfolding. When an unidentified child washes ashore in a small coastal town, word spreads fast. Residents of Walport gathered in disbelief. Parents clutched their children tighter. Reporters arrived. But even as the story reached the evening news, no one came forward to claim the boy. Detectives decided to release a drawing, a simple pencil sketch of the child's face based on photographs. The image ran on local TV stations across Oregon that night. In a nearby town, Denise Thompson sat in her parents' living room when the broadcast aired. "Mom," she whispered, staring at the screen, "that looks like Zachary." Denise knew him. She'd babysat him just days before. His name was Zachary Longo, for years old. He had 2 younger sisters, Sadie and Madison. Their parents, Christian and Mary Jane Longo, had moved to Newport only a few weeks earlier. Denise worked with Christian at a local coffee shop. He was polite, cheerful, the kind of dad who bragged about his kids. The family had seemed happy, young, tidy, church-going, the kind of people who didn't make headlines. But now, Denise's hands trembled as she called the sheriff's office. "I think I know who that boy is." Detectives followed the lead immediately. They drove to the Longo family's condo, a luxury rental perched above the coastline in Newport. When they arrived, the scene was eerie. The door was locked. Inside, everything was spotless. Children's toys neatly stacked. Laundry folded. No signs of a struggle. It looked as though the family had stepped out for groceries and might return any moment. But the silence inside that apartment told a different story. The detectives tried to locate Christian and Mary Jane, but no one in Newport seemed to know them. They hadn't made friends. No emergency contacts. No relatives nearby. To the town, they were ghosts, people who had appeared out of nowhere. As night fell over the Oregon coast, investigators faced the one truth they couldn't ignore. A child had been murdered, and the family who should be grieving was missing. The FBI joined the investigation the next morning. Special Agent Mike Hullman, a 17-year veteran, was assigned to the case. He'd seen abductions, disappearances, and drownings before, but this one was different. "We had nothing," he later said. "No history, no background, no family, nothing." A command post was set up in Newport. Agents went door to door, knocking on every home, showing Zachary's photo. They checked hotels, schools, even car rental records. No trace. Helicopters swept the coastal roads. The Coast Guard scoured nearby inlets, searching for wreckage footprints, anything. Maybe, they thought, the family had driven off the road, a tragic accident, their car now hidden beneath the black water of the bay. But day after day, the search turned up nothing. The Longos hadn't crashed. They hadn't moved away. They had simply vanished. Then, on the 3rd day, the ocean gave up another secret. Divers returned to the same bay where Zachary had been found, looking for clues. Visibility was poor, the water murky and cold. After an hour underwater, one diver surfaced, shouting hoarsely for help. He was holding a sleeping bag. Inside was the body of a little girl. Blonde hair, small frame, dressed only in underwear. Around her ankle, a pillowcase tied to a heavy rock. She had been deliberately weighted down. Moments later, another bag was found. Inside it, a second pillowcase filled with stones. That discovery confirmed what investigators had feared. This was no accident. Someone had murdered Zachary and his sister, then tried to hide them beneath the tide. For Detective Bossy, it was the moment the case stopped being professional. It was the first time in my career I broke down and cried. He said later, "You look at those kids and think, who could do this? Who could look in their faces and do that?" By nightfall, the FBI had locked down the area. The town of Newport was paralyzed, a quiet fishing community suddenly living with the realization that a child killer was in their midst. 2 children dead, 2 more family members missing, and not a single clue pointing to who or why. Residents double-checked their locks. Mothers slept beside their children. Strangers eyed each other warily at gas stations. The mystery wasn't just who killed Zachary and Sadie Longo. It was whether the rest of their family was next. The discovery of the second child's body turned quiet Newport, Oregon, into a town gripped by terror. 2 innocent lives had been taken, and the rest of the Longo family, Mary Jane, Christian, and their baby Madison, were still missing. Rumors spread faster than the coastal wind. Some whispered a serial killer stalking the coastline. Others feared a family tragedy no one could yet comprehend. The ocean had returned 2 small bodies. Now everyone wondered what else it was hiding. Investigators began piecing together what little they knew. The Longos had moved to Newport just 6 weeks earlier. No family nearby. No friends. No one really knew them. Their neighbors at the landing apartments said the family kept to themselves. They seemed clean, polite, quiet, almost too quiet. No one had seen or heard a thing. The FBI joined local police in what quickly became one of Oregon's most complex murder investigations. Agents canvassed every home and business along the coast, showing photos of the children and asking questions. Did anyone remember seeing the family? Their car? Anything strange near the docks or bridges? Most had nothing to offer. The family had lived like shadows, present but untraceable. Then came a call to the tip line. A man said he'd been crossing the Alsea Bay Bridge the night before the bodies were found. He'd noticed a vehicle parked along the shoulder with its lights flashing. Thinking someone might need help, he pulled over. A man stepped out, waved him off, and said everything was fine. The witness thought nothing of it until he saw the news. He couldn't describe the make or plate of the car, only that the driver seemed calm. The details sent a chill through the investigation. Detectives also considered an unsettling possibility. The man who found Zachary's body might have planted it there. People sometimes insert themselves into investigations to feel important or to hide guilt. They brought him in for questioning. His record showed prior offenses against children. Under pressure, he insisted he was innocent. He said he'd been at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that night. Police searched the meeting hall. When they sprayed luminol in the bathroom, glowing stains appeared across the walls and sink. For a moment, everyone believed they had their killer. But DNA results later proved the blood didn't belong to Zachary. It came from addicts who used the restroom to inject drugs. The lead evaporated as quickly as it came. While detectives chased false trails, the FBI expanded its focus. They began looking into the Longo's past, tracing financial records, phone numbers, rental histories, and employment files. The name Christian Longo started to raise red flags across multiple states. There were unpaid debts, bad checks, eviction notices, even theft reports. A pattern was emerging, one of charm, ambition, and deception. Mary Jane's life told a different story. She'd been raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of 6 children in a devout Jehovah's Witness family. Her childhood was strict, structured, filled with church meetings and curfews. She met Christian when she was in her mid-20s and working as a secretary. He was 17, confident, smooth-talking, and hungry for success. He shared her faith and spoke about wanting to build a strong family. To her, he seemed mature beyond his years. They married in 1993. Their first son, Zachary, was born 4 years later, followed by Sadie and Madison. To outsiders, the Longos looked like the perfect young couple. Christian ran a small cleaning business. Mary Jane stayed home with the children. They dressed neatly, attended church, and sent out Christmas cards with polished family photos. Behind the smiles, the foundation was crumbling. Christian's business was failing. He spent money he didn't have, driving new cars and buying expensive clothes to project success. When creditors began closing in, he forged checks to keep up appearances. He borrowed from friends, then lied to cover his tracks. Every decision drove the family deeper into debt. By the time they reached Oregon, Christian was living a double life. To the people of Newport, he was a friendly new co-worker at the coffee shop. To his wife, he was still a man of faith, a provider trying to rebuild. But privately, he was drowning, financially, emotionally, and morally. Friends like Denise Thompson noticed small cracks. Christian's cheerfulness sometimes felt forced. Once, after she babysat the kids so he and Mary Jane could go on a date, he returned with red, swollen eyes. Denise assumed they'd argued. A few days later, he told her Mary Jane had left him and taken the children. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed. She thought he was heartbroken. In truth, by that time, Mary Jane and the children were already dead. Investigators still didn't know that. They only knew they were chasing shadows. Each lead ended in frustration. Christian's co-workers hadn't seen him since before Christmas. His phone was disconnected. The family's apartment remained perfectly neat, as if frozen in time. The refrigerator was stocked, the beds made, the children's toys lined up like museum pieces. Detectives felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. Were Mary Jane and Madison hiding somewhere in fear, or had they met the same fate as Zachary and Sadie? Was Christian a victim or the architect at all? The ocean outside Newport held its secrets close. The divers would return soon, pushing deeper under the docks. And what they were about to find would confirm the investigators' worst fears. Because the Longo family story wasn't just about missing people. It was about a man who built his life on lies, and when the facade began to crumble, decided that if he couldn't keep his perfect family, no one else would either. The ocean had already revealed 2 children. Everyone feared what it might bring up next. Divers prepared to go back beneath the docks near the Longo family's condominium complex. The water was black with silt and debris, the temperature just above freezing. Visibility was nearly zero. They moved slowly, their flashlights cutting through the murk like thin blades of light. An hour into the search, a diver spotted something wedged beneath a piling. It looked like a duffel bag, its edges frayed from the current. As he pulled it loose, a lock of human hair floated through the water. He surfaced, gasping into his radio. When the bag was lifted onto the dock and unzipped, everyone went silent. Inside was a woman's body, folded unnaturally, stripped of clothing and packed tightly inside a suitcase. Another smaller bag was retrieved only minutes later. Inside was a toddler. The divers backed away in shock. It was Mary Jane Longo and her 2-year-old daughter, Madison. Both had been strangled. Both had been dumped into the bay like forgotten belongings. Investigators who had worked decades in homicide couldn't hold it together. One later admitted he cried for the first time on the job. The thought that a mother and her baby had been left like that, thrown away with such precision and cruelty, was too much to bear. The mystery that had paralyzed the Oregon coast was over. The Longo family had been found. But the horror was just beginning. One person was missing, not a victim, but a suspect. Christian Longo. Detectives now face a question no one wanted to say out loud. Did this father murder his entire family? The evidence screamed yes, but motive was harder to understand. On the surface, Christian was clean-cut, polite, and charming. He smiled often, worked hard, and talked about his kids constantly. No one who met him would have imagined this ending. Police sealed off the Longo's condo and searched every inch. Nothing seemed out of place. No struggle, no blood, no broken furniture. It was as though Christian had erased every trace of violence before walking out the door. He'd even cleaned the bathroom and vacuumed the floors. The control and calm it would take to do that chilled the investigators. When they spoke to Denise Thompson, the co-worker who'd babysat the Longo children, she remembered something that now seemed haunting. The last time she saw Christian, He had been quiet, distant. He told her, almost casually, that his wife had left him and taken the kids. He wanted her to hear it from him first. Then he disappeared. To Denise, it had sounded like heartbreak. To detectives, it was premeditation. FBI analysts dug into Christian's past, hoping to understand what kind of man they were dealing with. They found a trail of deception that stretched across states. In Michigan, Christian had once been considered an upstanding member of his Jehovah's Witness congregation, but as his small business collapsed, he started forging checks and stealing money from clients. When caught, he manipulated his way out, promising to change. He didn't. His fraud escalated until even his church turned its back on him. That rejection hit hard. In their faith, disfellowship meant spiritual exile. You became invisible, not just to friends, but to your own family. For someone as image-obsessed as Christian, it was a social death sentence. When his crimes caught up with him again in Ohio, he fled the state overnight. Mary Jane's clothes, her Bible, even the children's toys were left behind. She didn't protest. She followed. Family members later said she was dependent on him emotionally and financially. Every decision went through Christian. He controlled their money, their travel, even who they spoke to the outside world. They were a wholesome young family starting over on the West Coast. But inside that image was a man driven by ego and fear, an ambitious perfectionist who would rather destroy everything than face failure. Mary Jane's relatives had filed a missing person report in Ohio months earlier after she stopped calling. Then a postcard arrived from South Dakota. It was signed by Mary Jane and said they were fine, that Christian was looking for work. But investigators now believed he wrote it himself to stop anyone from asking questions. That pattern of control, of erasing his family's paper trail, was everywhere. Every time someone got close to seeing behind the curtain, Christian moved them to another town. He had been running from exposure for years, and the pressure was closing in. Financially, he was broke. Spiritually, he was exiled. Professionally, he was a fraud. But to everyone around him, he still played the part of the loving father, until he couldn't anymore. By now, every news outlet in Oregon was running the same photograph. Christian and Mary Jane smiling together, their children beaming between them. To viewers, it looked like an ordinary Christmas card. To investigators, it was a lie frozen in time. A nationwide manhunt began. The FBI distributed Christian's face across airports, truck stops, and post offices. He was now the primary suspect in the murders of his wife and 3 children. But the longer he remained missing, the more theories surfaced. Some wonder if Christian had killed himself out of guilt. Others thought he was on the run, using fake IDs and stolen credit cards to stay hidden. Then came the first real lead. A coffee shop in San Francisco called the FBI. A man matching Christian's description had just applied for a job there. He used his manager's name as a reference and listed fake phone numbers for co-workers back in Oregon. It was him. Agents staked out the Starbucks, waiting for him to return. He never showed. But days later, a new trail appeared. Credit card charges from Texas, then a flight to Cancun, Mexico. Christian had vanished again. Only this time, he was no longer just a liar or a thief. He was an accused murderer running from the FBI. The discovery of Mary Jane and Madison's bodies had confirmed what everyone feared. The Longo children hadn't drowned by accident. Their deaths were deliberate, methodical, and deeply personal. Christian's life of deceit had finally exploded into something irredeemable. Investigators believe they now understood the full picture. When his lies began to crumble and his family's financial ruin became impossible to hide, Christian made a decision that defied human reason. He would rather destroy the image of perfection than let anyone see it shatter. The perfect father, the loving husband, the man of faith, all of it had been a mask, and behind it was something monstrous. But he was still out there, alive, unrepentant, and moving further from justice with every mile. The next chapter of the search would take agents thousands of miles away, across borders and oceans, where they would finally come face to face with a man the FBI now called one of America's most dangerous fugitives. By the time authorities confirmed that the entire Longo family, except for Christian, was dead, the hunt for him had become a national priority. The FBI distributed his photo to airports, bus stations, and post offices across the country. His face was plastered on television screens beside a single word that now defined him: killer. But finding him wouldn't be easy. Christian was a man who thrived on reinvention. He had slipped through the cracks before, and now he was doing it again. Investigators soon learned that he had applied for a job at a Starbucks in San Francisco, using a false name and listing fake references, including the manager who once supervised him in Oregon. When agents arrived to stake out the cafe, he was already gone, but his trail hadn't gone completely cold. They traced stolen credit card numbers used to book a flight from San Francisco to Dallas, and then another from Dallas to Cancun, Mexico. Christian had crossed the border. The FBI alerted its international office. Special Agent Dan Klee, stationed in Mexico City, had handled countless fugitives who believed Mexico would be their safe haven. In the early 2000s, Americans could enter without a passport, and Cancun's beaches were a convenient place for people to disappear. Within days, Christian Longo was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Posters bearing his image, smiling, clean-cut, blue-eyed, were circulated through tourist hubs, internet cafes, and hostels across Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Agents knew fugitives often sought familiarity, so they focused on spots popular with young Americans. Then a call came in. A local tour guide recognized him from a flyer. He said he'd taken a polite, soft-spoken man on a boat excursion near the coast, a man who called himself Michael Finkel, claiming to be a journalist from New York. He spoke about travel writing, adventure, and philosophy, and he was staying at a small campground near Tulum, about 50 miles south of Cancun. The FBI and Mexican authorities surrounded the camp quietly at dawn. The air was heavy with humidity and sea salt. In a thatched cabana, they found him, barefoot, sunburned and tan, sitting beside a young German woman who had been traveling through Mexico. She was a photographer, and Longo had charmed her with stories of his career as a writer. He had completely reinvented himself. When agents entered, Christian didn't panic. He looked up, startled but composed. "My name's Michael," he said. The agent held up the wanted poster. "Christian Michael Longo, right?" For a moment, he hesitated. Then he nodded. "Yes." He didn't resist arrest. He didn't ask why they were there. He already knew. On the flight back to the United States, Special Agent Klee sat across from a man whose lies had left 4 bodies in the Pacific. Christian spoke calmly, almost serenely. He quoted scripture, discussed morality, and talked about redemption. When Klee asked where his family was now, Christian's answer was chilling in its simplicity. "They're asleep," he said softly. "In your faith, what does that mean?" "It means they're in a better place." That was as close as he came to a confession. Back in Oregon, prosecutors began preparing a capital murder case. They knew what they were up against. Christian had always been a manipulator, capable of turning sympathy into advantage. Even now, his appearance, clean-shaven, articulate, and mild-mannered, didn't fit the public image of a killer. In court, his defense would center not on denial, but on distortion. Christian's trial was scheduled for March 2003, but before it began, he made a calculated move. In February 2003, he pleaded guilty to murdering Mary Jane and Madison, admitting that he had strangled them. Yet he denied killing Zachary and Sadie, insisting that his wife had taken their lives in a jealous rage before he snapped and killed her in retaliation. The plea stunned the courtroom. It was classic Longo, half-truths wrapped in self-preservation. By pleading guilty to 2 murders, he appeared remorseful while casting doubt on the other 2. The trial that followed was surreal. Christian took the stand in his own defense. He spoke clearly, his voice steady. He described coming home to find his 2 older children dead, claiming Mary Jane had drowned them after a fight. He said he strangled her in blind anger, then smothered baby Madison because she was gasping for air. The prosecution dismantled the story piece by piece. The evidence showed method, not madness. Sleeping bags weighted with rocks, suitcases sealed shut, and no signs that Mary Jane had harmed anyone. The timeline proved his version impossible. But Christian wasn't testifying for facts. He was performing for control. Even in shackles, he wanted to dictate the narrative. For Mary Jane's family, sitting in the courtroom was torture. They listened as a man who had taken everything from them rewrote their daughter's final moments, painting her as a monster. One of her brothers later said, "He couldn't just kill her. He had to destroy her reputation, too." The jury didn't take long. After less than a day of deliberation, they found Christian Longo guilty on all 4 counts of aggravated murder. At sentencing, he stood and addressed court unshaken. "This is a wake-up call for me," he said. The words hung in the air like poison. Even in judgment, he was still the same man, self-centered, performative, incapable of genuine remorse. The judge handed down the death penalty. Mary Jane's family wept quietly. For them, it wasn't victory. It was survival, the knowledge that he would never again hurt anyone. In interviews from death row, Christian continued to reinvent himself. He described himself as spiritually reborn and claimed he wanted to atone. In 2011, he even made headlines for offering to donate his organs in exchange for an expedited execution. Officials denied the request, calling it a publicity stunt. Those who knew him best said that summed him up perfectly. Even on death row, he couldn't bear the idea of being forgotten. The story of Christian Longo isn't about a man who snapped. It's about a man who built his life on lies until those lies consumed everyone around him. He wanted to appear perfect, the husband, the father, the faithful man of God. But behind that image was greed, pride, and fear. When he finally realized the mask couldn't hold, he destroyed the only people who truly believed in him. From Michigan to Oregon to Mexico, every stop along his trail tells the same story. Charm, deception, collapse, escape. And at the center of it all, a man who couldn't stand the thought of anyone seeing who he really was. When the sentence was read, the room fell silent. The words were final. Death. For the first time, Christian Longo no longer controlled the narrative. He had spent years manipulating the people around him, friends, co-workers, his wife, even his children. But now, the story was over, and he was no longer the author. His calm demeanor unnerved everyone in the courtroom. There were no tears, no regret, not even the faintest tremor in his voice. To him, the trial was just another stage performance, another opportunity to appear in command. He looked at the judge, nodded slightly, and said the words no one could forget, "This is a wake-up call for me." It was the same self-absorbed tone that had followed him throughout his life. Even at his own sentencing, it was still about him. Mary Jane's family sat frozen in their seats. They had waited months for this moment, but it brought no comfort. Justice could not erase the images of what had been done or fill the absence left behind. Their daughter and her 3 children were gone, their lives taken by the man who once swore to protect them. All that remained was disbelief, a quiet, unbearable truth that no punishment could undo. In the weeks after the trial, Christian began speaking again. From his cell on Oregon's death row, he granted interviews, wrote letters, and seemed to enjoy the attention. He told reporters that he had acted out of desperation, that he had been under pressure. He described being overwhelmed by debt, shamed by failure, and unable to face the collapse of his perfect image. He said he couldn't see a way out, so he decided to save his family from the humiliation he believed was coming. His confession was chilling in its detail. He said that on the night of the murders, he and Mary Jane were intimate. While she slept afterward, he strangled her. Then he killed their youngest child, Madison, and packed both bodies into suitcases. He drove to the docks and threw the luggage into the dark water, weighting them down with rocks. When he returned home, he woke Zachary and Sadie, telling them they were going for a drive. He carried them one by one to the edge of the Alsea Bay Bridge and dropped them into the cold Pacific below. Moments later, a passing driver stopped, concerned by the sight of his car's flashing lights. Christian smiled and said everything was fine. He then drove back to Newport and went to a Christmas party. To the people there, he seemed relaxed, polite, ordinary. No one could have guessed what he had just done. Psychologists who later studied his case called him a textbook narcissist. He wasn't a man who snapped in a moment of rage. He was someone who viewed every part of his life as a reflection of himself. His family existed to support the image he projected. When that image began to fracture, he destroyed it. In his mind, it was better to erase them completely than to live with the shame of exposure. Investigators said his crimes were some of the most controlled they had ever seen. The apartment he left behind was spotless. The murders were planned, methodical, and staged to conceal evidence. He had prepared the suitcases and the pillowcases filled with stones in advance. Everything about the crime reflected the same obsession with order that had defined his public life. To those who knew him, the hardest thing to accept was how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't violent, unpredictable, or openly cruel. He smiled easily, held doors open, and quoted scripture. But behind the politeness was calculation. He learned what people wanted to hear, mirrored their emotions, and used their trust to build a persona that never existed. The murders of Mary Jane, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison forced investigators to reconsider what drives family annihilators. Men who kill those closest to them when their image collapses. They share the same traits: charm, pride, and a deep fear of humiliation. They tell themselves it's mercy, that they're protecting their family from a worse fate. But in truth, it's control. The final act of ownership over people they never truly saw as equals. Years later, Christian tried to reclaim attention. He wrote essays from prison, describing himself as spiritually reborn. He proposed a program where death row inmates could donate their organs in exchange for quicker executions, claiming it would be his way to give back. Officials rejected the idea, calling it a self-serving stunt. For Mary Jane's relatives, it was proof he hadn't changed. He was still performing, still looking for admiration. Even the alias he used while on the run, Michael Finkel, the name of a real journalist, became another strange twist. The journalist later published a book about their correspondence, exploring how easily Christian could still manipulate those who spoke to him. For the public, the story was haunting. For the victims' families, it was another reminder that he had turned their tragedy into a narrative he could control. Today, the Oregon State Penitentiary holds Christian Longo on death row. He is middle-aged now, his face leaner, his eyes duller, but the same detachment remains. In interviews, he still refers to his family's murders as if they were a chapter in someone else's life. He speaks in measured tones, often quoting scripture or philosophy, but never sorrow. The people of Newport haven't forgotten. The bridge still stands where the children were thrown. The docks where Mary Jane and Madison were found still carry the quiet hum of the sea. On misty mornings, residents say the place feels heavier, as though the coastline itself remembers. For the detectives who worked the case, the memories never faded. The sleeping bags, the cold water, the impossible calm on the face of a man who had destroyed everything he touched. They called it one of the darkest cases in Oregon's history, not just for the brutality, but for the deceit that surrounded it. The story of Christian Longo endures because it exposes a truth people rarely want to face. Evil doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks ordinary. It wears a smile, quotes the Bible, and kisses his children goodnight. He wasn't a man who lost control. He was a man who could not stand to lose the illusion of perfection. And in protecting that illusion, he revealed what he truly was. The tide still comes in over the Oregon coast, washing over the same sand where the truth first surfaced. It brings with a quiet reminder: monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live among us, convincing the world they're good men, until the mask finally breaks.